I remember growing up with a mother who told us that having us ruined her life, and I want to give grace to my mom that it wasn't about us so much, but like, she was supposed to go to LA and work in the movie industry. And then we came along and she couldn't go. And, there was this very deep story. And I think also kind of witnessing friends who had babies quite young and, who did seem to like lose their capacity to navigate, the goals that they had in life and things like that. I think, I can kind of reflect on how I came to motherhood with a bit of a story or a bit of a program around the struggle and the like lack of motherhood, and that it was taking from me, and that I was going to lose myself in it. And, I've worked really hard on that over the last few years, and I feel like I'm in a very different place with that. But I still see it a lot. And I can find myself sometimes getting into the pity party a little bit if someone starts that conversation and I'm like, I don't want to stand out. And I'm also like, okay, like, let's go with how bad it is. And then I'm like, oh, like I don't like myself when I leave that. But, I guess I'm sitting in like, as someone who now has, 9 children, maybe 10, how have you learned to reclaim the kind of, what is really the most enriching and I mean, okay. One thing that came to me is I'm like, I actually think the reason they've told us it's so bad is because if we recognize how good it is, we're going to become so empowered that we're just basically going to not engage with any of this bullshit that they've created for us, like the corporate ladder and blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm so happy in my garden with my kids. I don't really want to do anything. And then I'm like, does that make me terribly lazy? Like, am I just a blight on the world? But yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment. I wonder if you can enlighten me. Oh, Queen.
Well, the some of the most uh the harshest feedback that I tend to receive, the most outrage that I receive, let's say on social media, tends to be when I talk about how we actually have a choice whether or not to hook into the story that motherhood is depleting and denigrating and boring and stressful and awful. Yeah, because I think that there really is an enormous temptation to wallow in self-pity and to villainize our children, and play the victim of this terrible thing that is motherhood. And I can relate to actually I had this image when you were speaking that of my best friend's kitchen when I was a kid, and her mother had a big sign in the sort of front and center in the kitchen that read, "I wanted to change the world, but then I had kids." And I'd forgotten about that for ages, but it just came to my head as you were talking. And what a terrible thing. And I really have gone through myself a process of actively reclaiming the joy of motherhood and myself in motherhood. And I think for me, that has a lot to do with having been a really bad mother. Like, I've been a really terrible mother. I think we all do have our moments. Yeah. Yeah. And that's also something that I feel is very important to bring into this conversation. I get a lot of feedback too from women who say things like, well, it's easy for you to, like, you're rich and you probably, like, you have a husband who I'm sure makes a ton of money. He totally doesn't. I support our entire family eventually. But anyway, the stories that are made up about any woman who dares to step outside of that narrative of victimhood in the context of mothering is actually quite, it's very revealing of the kind of programming that you're talking about. But ultimately, it really is a choice. And actually, I spent a lot of years. So I've been a bad mother and a good mother and a terrible mother and a wonderful mother. And overall, I'm just a mediocre, normal mother. But I spent a lot of years feeling very victimized by, I guess, in a way, by motherhood. But I did a lot of self-sabotage in that kind of area for a long time. And it was really through recognizing that my life is a feat of my own creation, that I have created this. I have chosen all of these children. I've chosen the husband that I have. I've built this life through every choice that I've made. And that itself, as simple as it sounds, was really an enormous wake-up call. And I realized that actually, if there was some aspect of my reality that I wasn't enjoying, then I could either change that or continue to feel like a victim, which I realized was very delicious. Like, I think it's very delicious to play the victim. I think most of us actually on some level really enjoy it a lot. It's very I mean, it's the way out, right? It's the antithesis of taking responsibility for ourselves. And if we're actually willing to take responsibility for ourselves, then that means that we have to acknowledge that we've created the situation we find ourselves in, and that we have the option of making different choices that can change our reality. And I did actually change my life in every way. We changed countries, I changed my financial situation, but that began, all of those adjacent benefits began with me realizing that I was actually choosing to not enjoy all of these various aspects of motherhood that at that time I felt like I had no options around. I felt like I was stuck, and I wasn't stuck, and I don't think any of us are actually really stuck. And that again is a very I think we prove the truth of that in our insistence on denying it. If that makes sense.
I know what you mean. That's this funny little
It's a loop.